Hello and welcome to ABP Live. I have with me today veteran diplomat Mr. Rajiv Bhatia. He has been the former ambassador to Myanmar and he has also been heading the Indian Council of World Affairs. Welcome to ABP Live, sir, and thank you so much for talking to us.
Thank you very much. I'm really happy to be here.
Thank you, sir. So, just to start off, we are here to discuss the India-Myanmar relationship and also the fact that how much the coup there in Myanmar that happened on 1st February 2021 had an impact directly or indirectly on India's northeast. But just to begin with, to give some context to our viewers, we all know that the military coup happened 1st February 2021, but it came as a sudden shock to people because people were thinking Myanmar is going the democratic way. Now we see the democratic leader there, Aung San Suu Kyi, she's been detained. How did it all build up, sir? If you can give us your analysis of that because you're an expert on it.
In that case, let me take you and the viewers just about a decade back until about 2010. Myanmar was nothing but a military rule or a military dictatorship, if you want to use the harsh word. And that was the time when the strongman of the regime, General Than Shwe, Senior General Than Shwe, decided that time has come to offer to the people of Myanmar a limited form of democracy or hybrid democracy. So he had arranged to give a constitution which was approved through referendum. And then in 2011, a civilian government was installed, which was headed by a former general, President Thein Sein. This was the time when the election took place in 2010 and NLD, Madame Aung San Suu Kyi's party, had not taken part in it.
Right.
So eventually they brought her into the political process, and for 5 years, 2011 to 2016, Myanmar passed through perhaps one of the best periods in its recent political history. It seemed that democracy was very slowly taking roots and it was preparing for even a fuller democracy, which came in 2016 when free and fair elections took place. Madame Aung San Suu Kyi and party were allowed to take part and they won hands down. So that is where now she was the head of the government and limited democracy was in operation. It is in this background, again 5 years later, in 2020, the elections took place and yet another landslide victory for her. And in that victory lay the seeds of the crisis symbolized by the coup.
So in 2020, as you rightly said, I mean, the way the elections took place and the kind of mandate she got, why did the military say that they will not agree to it? I mean, anyway, previous to that, they had a say in the governance. It's not that they were written off. What happened really? Why did they not accept those results?
You are absolutely right. For those 10 years that I described, it was a hybrid democracy in the sense that the constitution divided powers. Some powers were with the military, other powers were given to the elected government. And it was hoped that the two will carry forward and cooperate. In 2020 elections, when the solid landslide victory of Madame Aung San Suu Kyi again took place, the military discovered that there were a lot of fraudulent practices in the elections. At least they alleged that there were a lot of wrong things took place, which is the reason why NLD had won. So it was regarded as an unfair victory. This is where both sides got it wrong. Military hoped that by showing its dissatisfaction, it will prevail on the NLD to make some amends. NLD did not do so because NLD underestimated the strength of the military and overestimated the power of the people. So it became a very clear situation of who would prevail, the voter or the gun. And as you know, in this kind of situation, when the military imposed the coup, it was the gun that prevailed.
So now the military, the junta is saying that they will hold elections, but we know that, Suu Kyi is still under detention. How do you think that will pan out? And do you really think they can hold the elections in the given circumstances? And also the fact that how the military has unleashed violence there. People say that they used to do it earlier also, but you can give a better picture because you were posted there. Compared to those times and today, do you think the violence has really exceeded certain levels?
So let me desegregate the two questions.
Correct.
One is on the elections, and
Mhm.
the other is on violence. On the feasibility of elections, there is a great deal of skepticism
Mhm.
because the situation is still very disturbed. It's very unstable, and it is marked by violent incidents in many parts of the
Mhm.
country. So I think most observers of Myanmar affairs would today say that perhaps it's very difficult for the military to hold the elections. And even if they were to succeed in holding elections of some kind,
Mhm.
it's almost impossible for elections to be seen to be
To be
legitimate.
fair, yes.
As, you know, after all, they're looking for
Right.
credibility and legitimacy.
Mhm.
So the fundamental purpose of holding the elections may not be achieved.
Mhm.
Now, on the question of violence, this is very true that there is violence, but I think we must recognize that it is being the result of clashes between the military and the resistance. I think, in the absence of a better word, we can call it the resistance or the
Resistance.
opposition.
Mhm.
So you have a tragic situation of a country where citizens of the country uh, think it necessary to go and attack the police people and the army people of your own country.
Mhm.
On the other hand, you have the military, including the Air Force, which think it necessary to bomb its own citizens.
Correct.
These two examples show how seriously wrong the situation has gone, and it's very difficult to foresee at this stage how and when this violence will be brought to a stop.
So was the situation like this earlier also when the military was ruling before Aung San Suu Kyi came to the picture?
No, I can recall very clearly the 3 years, 2002 to 2005, when I
Mm.
served as India's ambassador in Yangon.
Mm.
Yangon was still the capital. As you
Right.
know, now they built a new city called Naypyidaw.
Mhm.
That is the capital. So Yangon has been the capital for many, many decades. We lived there. It was a very safe and secure and tranquil place.
Okay.
Military ruled the country. They did provide security. They, of course, didn't believe in democracy.
Mhm.
They believed in supreme and pivotal role of the military in the political situation. But things worked. And this is a largely Buddhist country, so people went about doing their own business. Slowly, Myanmar was coming up, and when the generals decided consciously that time has come to open up the
Right.
political process, we all were very hopeful. But then, as you know, accidents occur and politics gets completely derailed, which is
Mhm.
what happened in Myanmar.
Mhm. So now coming to India's relationship with the Myanmar, what we get to hear is the fact that yes, although India supports the democratic process there, it has dealt with the military leaders there earlier, so they have a relationship, and also for the safety of our, the borders in the northeast, how porous it is, it much better than anyone else. It is imperative to do business with them. But we are also seeing how, as you rightly said, the violence has unleashed there and how it has gone to a level that has never been seen before. So there is this dichotomy whether and how much should India engage with Myanmar? Should it really engage? And if it does so, how do you think it can play the balancing act? Because there is the China factor also playing out in the background.
You are absolutely right. I think you have depicted the driving impulses behind India-Myanmar relationship accurately. Myanmar is our immediate neighbor. A
Mhm.
lot of our own fellow countrymen and women do not realize that we have over 1650 kilometers common border with Myanmar. It is an
Correct.
immediate neighbor. So, neighborhood first policy applies as far as Myanmar is concerned. Then, secondly, Myanmar is part of Southeast Asia, and therefore, India's Act East policy also applies here. And the third policy, which is very relevant, is the government of India's policy to bring greater stability and faster economic development in the Northeast. So that means three policies drive us to a situation where we must have very close and cooperative relations with Myanmar. On top of that, there is the strategic factor that you have referred,
Right.
which is that Myanmar has another large neighbor, which is China. And clearly, Chinese, given their geopolitical intentions and strategies, they keep pushing themselves into Myanmar. And our well looked after experts of the YOR had always told us that the defense of Myanmar, or the defense of Burma, as the old name was, is the defense of India. In other words, if you want to remain safe and sound in India, you must have good cooperation with Myanmar. That was the wisdom from the past. So in this context, you are absolutely right in saying that India has to adopt a very balanced and calibrated policy. This two-facet policy that was adopted: do business with the government of the day, but always let people of Myanmar know that India, by conviction, by experience, by belief, by practice, supports the idea of democracy in Myanmar. But that will have to be brought by the people themselves. It cannot be imposed from outside.
Good you say that, sir, because what we get to hear from the side, from the Myanmar, the people, the common man, there is that India is siding with the military leaders. They are not looking at the violence. They are not helping us. I mean, recently we had our shipping minister inaugurating the Sittwe Port there, and the Kaladan Project had been going on for almost 10 years. This is the first sort of step. How do you think India can really make people of Myanmar understand what you rightly said, the kind of twin track policy that we are following?
I'm aware of these misgivings in certain quarters. I would not think that this is the overall widespread comprehensive view of the Myanmar people. I think as far as I recall, the people of Myanmar have a very positive view of India. I think it is the dream of every Burmese to visit India once, to be able to go to various pilgrimages of Buddhism. But yes, it is true that our policy as to why it is necessary for India to work with the government needs to be explained more extensively and more convincingly. And here, since you mentioned about the projects, I think Indian government has some duty to the Indian taxpayer also. India has invested a huge amount of money developing these infrastructure projects, the trilateral highway, the Kaladan project, and other road projects, etc. They have all been possible due to the money government has invested in. So if completion of a project has to be achieved, this only can be achieved with the willing cooperation of the government of Myanmar. And therefore, frankly, I don't see anything wrong in our trying to help make now the Sittwe port operational. In fact, the immediate benefit of this is the people of the Rakhine state. Of course, it will also help the trade relationship, which is beneficial to both sides. But to say that by doing business with the government, we are misrepresenting ourselves is actually a misrepresentation of the real situation. In terms of our supporting democracy, because if that is what the issue is, please have a look at the record of what India has been doing at the UN. At every step, India has supported the idea that violence must be stopped, that peaceful solution of the problems should be sought, and humanitarian assistance should be given to the people. And it is in that context, India has been very active in supporting the ASEAN also, which is the principal agency trying to resolve the problems. And on top of that, when it seemed that the ASEAN formula will not fully work, and they needed the help of the neighbors, the immediate neighbors of Myanmar, India has stepped in. India has taken part in the 1.5 track dialogue.
Right.
So I can really say with conviction that it's a question of running a balanced policy. That exact balance, how it should be done, I think this has to be left to the government here.
Sir, I'll come to this track 1.5 dialogue that you've talked about. 2 rounds of talks have already happened, is what the Ministry of External Affairs told us. And the fact that there is this ASEAN 5 point consensus. Also for India, it has to now, it comes from the US also, that when it comes to Indo-Pacific policy, you have to understand the ASEAN centrality of it, right? So in all of this, where do you think India can position Myanmar, and how effective will the track 1.5 will be?
Where India can position itself in the larger Indo-Pacific context, in the context of the Bay of Bengal, in the context of ASEAN, I think India's compass is very clear. India regards Myanmar as an immediate neighbor with very strong political, economic, spiritual, cultural, and geopolitical dimensions. So, first of all, India will, I think, keep shaping its policy on the basis of its own internal assessments. Secondly, in doing so, it will always consult ASEAN very closely, because ASEAN has deep stakes in Myanmar. Myanmar, after all, is a part of ASEAN, even though at the political level, as you know, the leaders have not been allowed to participate in ASEAN councils for the last 2 years plus. So in that sense, consultation with ASEAN will continue to happen. As far as the West is concerned, since you referred to the Indo-Pacific, so the 3 other members of the Quad, the US, Japan, and Australia, these 3 largely have a view which is divergent from the view of India. So here India's endeavor is to keep impressing on its Quad partners that we are there, we are part of the region. What happens in Myanmar impacts on us directly, and therefore please try to appreciate the Indian perspective, which is more realistic, which is close to the ground. It's very difficult to understand Myanmar sitting in Washington. So you'll appreciate that. And my final point would be that if Indo-Pacific is all about the contestation, the strategic contestation between the US and China, then the China factor in Myanmar must cause deep worry to the West, to the 3 members of the Quad. And therefore, they are the ones who must revise and review their policy and learn to look at this from the Indian prism.
Sir, now if I can ask you, since you know it so deeply, what exactly are China's plans as far as Myanmar is concerned?
Well, China essentially wants a very clear and easy access to the Indian Ocean. They are always worried about what is called the dilemma of the straits. The worry that at some stage the direct access that is available to them through the South China Sea could be choked. So they want to have alternatives. This is the reason why they are looking at China-Myanmar economic corridor. This is the reason why they are doing China-Pakistan economic corridor through Pakistan going to the Arabian Sea. So if the idea is that China gets access to the Indian Ocean, the partnership and the willing cooperation of Myanmar is absolutely vital. And in Myanmar, there are several constituencies which are willing to play the role to cooperate with China. And yet, I must also stress that the history of Myanmar shows to us that essentially Myanmar does not want to depend on only one power. They want for themselves a more balanced approach to the foreign relations and foreign economic relations in particular. So the choice is for India. If we want to help this positive mentality in Myanmar, that we want our own autonomy and our own independence, then India has to play a role in ensuring that Myanmar does not become entirely dependent on China, because China would want nothing more and nothing less than that. So entirely huge geostrategic stakes are in play, and India must be very clear-eyed in handling this very delicate relationship.
So now my last question to you will be in terms of what's happening in the Northeast, the Manipur violence, and then there are reports coming in that with the kind of refugees that are coming from Myanmar, there is this churn happening within the ethnicities there. How far is that true, and how do you think going forward this violence can be controlled? I mean, the army has brought it under control for now, but these things keep on erupting.
The reason why there is so much interest in the relationship with Myanmar does have something to do with the Northeast. But we should also be able to desegregate the two regions to a large extent. So, first of all, to begin with, as far as the recent unrest in Manipur is concerned, I'm not an expert on the region, but on the basis of my limited understanding, it seems to me that the unrest is largely driven by internal factors, and that the role of whatever may be coming in from Myanmar, whether it is refugees or drugs or criminals, that has been of a limited value or a limited relevance. But having said that, we should look at the larger picture. The larger picture is that not merely Manipur, but also Nagaland and Mizoram, these are border states. And therefore, India's border states are bound to be affected if there is instability and insecurity in Myanmar. It is common sense. Just as if our northeast is not stable, this can impact on Western Myanmar. So, what is the way out? The way out essentially is, I think, what we have been trying to do, focus a great deal on faster economic progress of Northeast through better connectivity, through greater investment, through involving various constituencies. But at the same time, the security and political issues also need to be addressed. I think our northeastern region is a vehicle that runs on two pillars, and I think our authorities are very conscious of that fact, that the economic progress has to be sustained and politico-security issues too have to be addressed. But as part of the larger approach, I think a stable, friendly, cooperative relationship with Myanmar will definitely prove to be helpful for our own national cause.
Well, sir, thank you so much for this rich discussion. That was Ambassador Rajiv Bhatia. He was India's former ambassador to Myanmar, talking to us about the situation in Myanmar, what is happening in the Northeast, and of course, how India should be managing its relationship with its immediate neighbor, which is Myanmar. For ABP Live, this is Nayanima Basu. Thank you for watching the interaction.